So this is kind of an interesting piece, I think, because it allows us to apply all the principles that we've talked about all day long to something that's really just up the road. And I think Bill Drunzig was asking earlier about the pro forma on this, but it's something that actually is doable in our lifetime. We'll get this done sooner than the roundabout. For anybody local, you may get that joke. So this is, we'll take a look at the parcel first. And if you guys have anything that you want to add during the whole thing, just jump right in. So we'll talk a little bit about the parcel and then what our vision might be for it. And then I'm going to actually use you guys as all cheap consultants. It's kind of when you call one up and say, hey, I got a couple of questions I want to ask, and you try to get a little bit of free advice. Anyways, why don't we hit the next slide? That's downtown Manchester, actually. That's the same slide I think that Janet used earlier. So we'll go past that one, too. So the town of Manchester owns quite a bit of land. We didn't include everything on here. This is stuff that we're looking at right now. Obviously, we own Town Hall, the Public Safety Building, the park, several parks. But there's three different kinds of parks. There's three parcels that we're looking at right now in Manchester as far as repurposing. And we'll go through each one. Why don't we just go to the next slide first. This one is actually really interesting, but it's not ready for prime time right here. Not ready for development yet. This is a piece of parcel, a parcel that we, Don Keelan here? I think you were involved in actually negotiating a piece of this, is that right? The settlement with the Equinox? That's right, so I don't want to go into too much detail because I might get called out as getting some of the details wrong. This is actually the airport in Manchester. Don't try to land there. It's not really that kind of airport. This is Route 7 here, and this is Richville Road. During a settlement with the Equinox Hotel back in the 1980s, Guinness, the beer makers of Ireland, were going to buy a stake in the Equinox Hotel, and the Equinox had a deal with the town called the UDAG loan, Urban Development Action Grant, and as part of that, Guinness was asking the current owners to settle up with the town and make sure that they weren't buying any bad debt. Part of that settlement was some cash, but it was also this piece of land that's about 60 acres. And that is zoned for mixed use, so I think it's basically quarter-acre zoning back there. One big snafu, though, there's no sewer. Sewer ends about here, right about there. So we are doing a sewer study to see if we can get sewer down here. We know we can. The irony of that is, this right here, anybody know what this is? That's the wastewater treatment plant, so it's not too far away to get the sewage over there. This could be a really, really, really significant development in Manchester, but again, it's not quite there yet, so we're going to skip over this one for now. This one is actually really interesting too, but it's not really, for housing it'd be difficult. This is the village courthouse, but we reverted back to the town ownership a couple years ago. Could you do housing there? Maybe, but it's actually it's the oldest courthouse in the state of Vermont, 1840. And it's been a public building for, you do the math, but 180 years or so. So we're looking to keep public ownership of that. Oh yeah, it's right across the street from the Equinox Hotel. This is actually Union Street. Actually down here is the sewer treatment plant, way down the road, for a little bit of context. So that one's probably not going to work either. So here's the last one. This is the old site of Town Hall. This is actually, if anybody's looking for a good pair of khakis, that is J. Crew. These two buildings are vacant right now. And this right here, if it was in the shot, is the old Friendly's restaurant. This is reverting back to town ownership in, do the math, April 2023. So we're talking very near term here. Why don't you advance, there you go. It was developed in the 1990s, mid-90s, so it's still relatively pretty new. It's been well taken care of. There is some basic items that probably should get addressed. And you can see the lease date here as well. Why don't you go to the next slide, Janet? Oh, and sorry, go back one. This is Depot Street here, and this is Center Hill. So there is some access up here through Center Hill, and this is, we call this building C, B, and A there. This is Price Chopper right here, and this is Starbucks. That's the Subway and the gym, and this is the pizza shop, just for context. Let's go to the next one. So it's 1.4 acres. There's 3 buildings on there, 3,000 square feet footprint per building, so a total of 18,000 square feet. We do receive some income off of it, $125,000 a year in land lease, and we owe the developer $100,000 for some HVAC and elevator improvements that were put into building A, which was entailed a loft. So we have to reimburse them for that. It says here the town can be flexible in reuse. Besides the $100,000, we've got nothing into this. When we developed this site over 20 years ago, so about 25 years ago, I think is the number, we used $125,000 a year to buy the current town hall and to pay for the public safety building. Those are totally paid for. So literally on this site, we've got nothing into it. They are assessed at about $2.6 million, the land and the 3 buildings. So it is worth something. But for us, as far as having some liability out there, the only liability that we have is the $100,000. And also, we've talked a lot about water, sewer, and other kinds of utilities. There is water and sewer, actually from both sides, from both Center Hill and from Depot Street. Just real quick here, the 3 designs. They're pretty open. These are the 3 buildings. This is the one furthest to the west, furthest to the town green. The middle building, this one does not have an elevator. This one does. And then this one is J. Crew. All of them 2 stories. There has been some talk of relocating municipal offices there, other kinds of regional government offices. We've been looking at the effects of bringing down, at one point we were looking at about 60 employees that would be going from areas outside downtown Manchester to Manchester and starting to add up the payroll that would be brought downtown during the daytime. It was millions of dollars, obviously. So we've been looking at the front buildings. We also have done a housing study on the front as well that we'll get to in a second here. Okay, here it is. This is White and Burke. Burke and White? I always get it back. What is it? White and Burke. White's more important than Burke. So you've got the 3 buildings here. They actually looked at connecting what we call Building C and Building B, and creating some access here. There's an elevator that's just about right there to avoid the cost of an elevator in the middle building. They looked at 3 units here, 3 units here, and 3 units here. It is relatively close to Depot Street. The access point is through here, and then this entire swath back here, all the way back here, is all either parking or landscaping. So there's a significant parcel here in the back, which is what we're looking at mostly. Good. Just a quick summary here. Actually, I don't think the timing was intentional, but last night the select board voted to use $100,000 from the ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan. It's interesting. Using the ARPA funds directly was sort of in a shade of gray, but then there's a provision that you can use the ARPA funds to reimburse lost revenues. So we recovered the lost revenues and then redirected it to the study. So we've taken $100,000 from our ARPA funds, as well as $60,000 in ARPA funds to look at extending sewer up Main Street for more affordable housing. But we've taken $100,000 and we're planning to use that for consulting services to get this project to the point that when April of 23 rolls around, we'll have a plan to enact. We'll have partners, much of what Don was talking about earlier. In fact, it's the same folks that Don worked with in St. Albans. So again, some kind of mixed use in the front, possibly housing, and then definitely affordable and workplace housing in the back. And not really quite sure what the mix would be between rental and ownership. We're just not that far ahead. Let's go to the next slide. The site's pretty interesting. And maybe, can you just go back to the map? Right here. What we've been looking at is actually building a structure back in. This is Depot Street. If you go up here, there's a nice little food shop. Nature's Market is up there. Factory Point Cemetery, and then Manchester Elementary Middle School is up there. So there'd be a much better connection between this part of Depot Street and Upper Main Street. And then you've got Depot Street here, which was just re-streetscaped with new bike lanes, more crosswalks. Go back again there you go. And then of course you've got access to the 3 town parks. There's one that we're actually anybody see the mess on the corner there with the traffic lights? It's actually gonna be a park. I know it's hard to imagine right now, but it's gonna be there. So you've got the town green up a little bit further, this little pocket park right next door, and then the park that has the farmer's market is right there as well. We're right back to the initial question that we started with. We know what's available. Obviously, this parcel is really interesting, and we talked about the pro forma that we did, which is based on vacancy rates, what you get for rent and market, and then of course we haven't even considered anything that's an affordable program yet. And then vacancy. Oh, and then what the town would actually get for its investment. So when you take a look at all those numbers, when you take a look at what the town investment is right now, which is really $100,000 that we owe on it, the vacancy rates, which we could drive down by bringing in stable tenants to the front. For example, if municipal government was to move there, we've been in business for 250, I can't remember, and we're gonna go for another 250. So we're a pretty stable tenant. And some of the other tenants that we're looking at are very stable long-term tenants. So now we can drive down the cost. The actual pro forma makes a little bit more sense because the vacancy rate is being whittled away over time. And then, so it really gets us back down to, we know what we have. The big question is, what is still needed? We actually announced yesterday, it's in the newspaper today, that we've proposed a $13.25 million indoor recreation space that includes 3 multi-use, think of them as basketball courts, side by side by side, with a running track, a climbing wall, and then indoor space that you can use for things like after-school care. So look at the Bennington banner. It's right on the front page, I think, Greg? You didn't put us on page 3, did you? Okay. Yeah, a $13.25 million project for Manchester is a big one. Oh, and actually in this space, the new Manchester Community Library is right up the road too as well, if you can make that connectivity with Center Hill.
And then there's the barn working space.
That's across the road, yeah. Yep. Yeah, so it's a great site. I think a lot of times, this is one of those projects that really falls within all those smart growth principles, and it's really hard to do. The other project that we're looking at is bringing sewer down Main Street past the current town hall, which could open up that site as well. That's a good, how would you describe that? It's a it's not in the downtown, but I guess you call it suburban almost. I don't know what you call it.
It's part of the core.
It's part of the core, but it is outside of there's not shops and restaurants nearby, but it does have a sidewalk that goes downtown. So anyways, that would open up several hundred acres of land to affordable housing. But I think it all comes down to the same thing that we keep hearing over and over and over again. We have water down that road, we need sewer. Without sewer, you're getting into septic systems and you're coming into a couple different things. One, we do charge a connection fee when somebody hooks up to the town sewer. And so a lot of times people will, I'll say politely, protest the fee. So I say, well, that's okay, you can go out and build a septic system. And then they get even more angry because the septic system costs 3 times more than the connection fee. So it is much cheaper to connect to town sewer. And then you're also talking about it's hard to build a single family house or a multi-use house on a quarter of an acre or half an acre with a septic system. It's impossible. So I think that for Manchester, for the expansion of affordable housing, we need sewer. To me, if there was one thing that the town could do besides this, it would be sewer. It's not the glamour end of the business, obviously, but it is such an important piece to try to get that density. So in the back, there are a couple of complications with the site. One is, it is in the flood zone, so we're gonna have to tackle that issue. That is actually manageable. And because of what the Planning Commission did and Janet did, building height-wise, we start to look at things that are efficient. So if this was a 2-story building, of course, we'd have the cost of getting people from the first floor to the second floor in an elevator. Getting people from the first floor to the third floor to the fourth floor is much cheaper per floor, obviously, because it's a very, very small cost to get that elevator up another story or 2. Right now, in the back, we're looking at 40 units. So that's 40 units. We've talked a little bit about, I guess I'll call it the Inn at Willow Pond debacle. That was 40 units. Bill's creating another 20 units. Of course, we have the habitat piece. That's constantly moving ahead one house at a time, and then we have West Branch. East Branch, sorry. West Branch is on the other side of town. So, questions, thoughts, ideas?
I've got a question.
Yes.
Does your pro forma assume any public investment at all? Tax credits? Can you describe a little bit about what that looks like?
That's a good question. So the question was, does the pro forma that we have right now include any tax credits or investments or public funding of it? The answer is no. And that's why it's so, when they first get the report back, you see that the numbers just don't quite hit the mark. And then you start to look at all the different numbers like that, whether it's affordable housing programs, tax credits, what Don was talking about earlier today, town actually investing, or the town simply saying, in this case, it's a lot simpler than St. Albans. It's the town saying, we have a town plan, and if we want to implement the town plan, we may have to readjust the expectation of what the town's return will be. This hasn't been earmarked for anything, so it's not like we've been sitting on this so-called nest egg saying, oh, when 2023 hits, we're going to run out and buy all this other stuff. We haven't done that. It's not really the way that we plan. This has been on the radar screen for years, but we haven't really said, let's take our $2.6 million, let's leverage it, and let's go out and buy 3 new fire trucks.
So, as John just mentioned, this is in the floodplain, so it's not part of the NDA. So, and the reason that none of those funds, there's no tax, there are no incentives available on this site. And, one of the things that I've argued for a while is on these already developed downtown sites that are in the floodplain, they ought to be eligible to be in part of the downtown designation program categories.
And this one
It
is
would
almost
help.
entirely
I mean,
paved.
every little bit helps when you have a marginal, financial situation like this.
Yeah, I'll just respond to that, and Jacob could correct me if I'm wrong, but that's one of the things we're pushing for as a correction to the existing legislation around designation programs. If it's already in the built environment, there's already infrastructure, and it is in the floodplain, we should find a way to allow buildings to be built with flood mitigation measures. Because unless we're proposing moving our historic downtowns and villages, where we're incentivizing growth, I don't see how we do this without that. And there is some agreement, even with A&R, the Rivers Management team, and everyone, that you can do this. You know, for example, the first floor in the back could be parking, right? It's the parking garage and housing's built above it. There's lots of ways to accommodate flood areas in existing environments. What we don't want to do is build where there's nothing in flood areas, because we're just, you know, creating more of a problem. So I was going to ask a question about the 3 buildings. Are they historic, or do they just look historic? So they were built to look historic as outlets. Okay.
The chair of the select board actually tells this funny story that somebody came in really excited because she couldn't believe that we had preserved these historic structures. It was so great. And then you look at it, it's poured cement foundation.
Yeah. Okay.
But they did a really nice job with the design.
So John, talk a little bit about the 40 units. What the thinking is, or what the don't go away, what the possibilities are for those. I mean, I think you're thinking about mixed use and working with Shire, someone. Just talk a little bit about that to get the discussion started, about how we actually get those 40 units off the ground.
Yeah, so with this site, since it doesn't quite pencil out, I think our current thinking is that it's going to be mixed residential, market, what we call workforce housing and affordable housing. I think for this site, it is going to be probably smaller units. We actually, in Manchester, and you looked at Janet's figures, we actually have a lot of multiple bedroom units, 3-4 bedroom units. What we see a lack in is, especially downtown, among younger people that want to move to Manchester, that we're seeing 1 and 2 bedroom units just not existent. So we're thinking about probably smaller footprints. I'm trying to remember back to when I was younger, and we all had that friend that was big into biking, and you go over to his place for a beer after work, and the bicycle would be one of the sitting implements in the living room. So we've thought of things like, you know, for example, bicycle storage down in the floodplain. Bikes are pretty resilient. So we're trying to think about, you know, how do we encourage people, like Jim was saying, to maybe ditch the car? You know, can we do zip car type arrangements here? Can we turn it into a transportation hub? Can we encourage people to ride, you know, bicycles to work? So it's all that kind of thinking. We're thinking about a little bit of a downtown lifestyle. I'm not going to say it's going to seem like you're living off Church Street in Burlington, but there is a lot of things to do there. There's a lot of different shops. There's a lot of new restaurants in the area. There's, gosh, a countless number of restaurants that would appeal to younger people moving to the area. So that's the thinking that we're trying to do. We have been talking to Kyle Murphy, actually, who did the BBA, who's with us today, about designing a structure that might be forward-thinking. You know, if you're going to have cars, you know, having places to plug them in, obviously. You can even buy a pickup truck now that's electric. So that's kind of the thinking on the, you know, probably 1 and 2 bedroom units, 1.5 bathrooms, kind of small, compact, urban living in the center of downtown.
Condos or apartments?
Yes. Could be both. It could be both. One of the this is obviously just boxes on the map. One of the ideas that we have is actually 2 separate structures that kind of create a kind of a V structure. And some may be, one side might be ownership, the other side might be rental. We've also been thinking about ways to try to, if this is a public investment and it's part of our town plan, trying to figure out a way that that we're attracting, for example, I think Janet was mentioning, we have 9 police officers and none of them live in Manchester. Amy is here. Her husband teaches at BBA and they live in Manchester, but that's unusual. A lot of the teachers at our local schools and at the high school live outside of Manchester. So we're trying to think of a way maybe that we could even give preference to civil servants, not the town manager. We'll definitely exempt him, but other people that we want living in the community because we want kids to see their teachers at the bakery or at Shaw's or wherever. And especially, one of the things that we see with our employees is that when they're starting out in their careers, they'll move to one of the neighboring communities, and by the time they move their way up the ranks and are making enough money to live in Manchester, they've already put down roots in another community. So we're not even getting them back when they, for example, the police department, our lieutenant lives outside of town now because he moved to a community when he was younger in his career, and he's not moving back because his kids are now in the school.
John, you want to talk about next steps, maybe, just to get the discussion started? Or what do you see as issues you're going to have to overcome, or just to get the discussion? And by the way, whenever you want to come back up, we're ready for you.
I'll think about that question.
Okay, all right.
Hey, John, good to see you. I live in Londonderry and I chair our housing group, and we have a North Village and a South Village, and they're both along the West River, and both villages happen to be in the floodplain, so I appreciate your question and comment. I have a little bit of a backup question regarding what was the first step that the town took when assessing your housing needs, and what did you do first? Thanks.
Probably, so, people always hate studies. That we have somebody that comes to the select board, and every time we talk about doing a study, she gets very upset. And I get it. There's plenty of shelves in my office that have studies that we haven't done anything with. But before you can really do something, you got to look at the data. And I think we've done a series of studies. We've done some housing studies. We've done some zoning studies. And we also did the economic development study, which is, it was actually before Janet was with us. But she has taken this graphic and run with it. I think it's on your desktop at work. And it's the one with the circles. And it's looking at how many people actually live and work in Manchester. And of course, that's always the dream from the smart planning perspective that it's interesting before I moved here, I'm actually originally from upstate New York. But when I moved here from Boston. And I'm not a Red Sox fan. And here, if you're driving 15, 20 minutes to work, it seems like a long ways. People in Boston would certainly laugh at that. 15, 20 minutes is like a 2-mile drive, maybe a mile drive. But when you're looking at the smart planning perspectives, it's always that people are going to live and work near each other. And we have that piece in the middle, I think it's about 1,000 people. So in Manchester, just because it is a regional hub between Rutland and Bennington, we have, Jim, 5,000 jobs? About 5,000 jobs. We have about 4,400 people. So we actually have more jobs than we have people. But only 1,000 of those people that work in town, out of the 5,000, only 1,000 of them actually live there. And then, of course, we also serve as a bedroom community for Bennington and Rutland. So then we have another 1,000 people that live in Manchester and don't work there. And so everybody else, so there's about 2,000 there, about 3,000 people come into Manchester every day to work. And some of them come from, as far away as New York. So I think that's the first thing that you have to look at is like, what's the data? And also when you're doing a market study too, some of the issues with housing may be that you just don't have the right kind of housing. And so that's what we looked at and said, okay, do we have anything downtown? Do we have anything that's 1 and 2 bedrooms? Because when you look at the data, most of it is like converted units that are 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms. And so I think you want to make sure that you have diversity in your housing stock. There was actually a long time ago in Manchester, the town was and I think you were there, Jim, the 3,000 square foot rule. In Manchester, they passed a zoning bylaw that you could not build a retail structure larger than 3,000 square feet. And so now when we move forward, now all we have is 3,000 square foot buildings everywhere. And that kind of runs into some, that's gone, and we've built some different buildings, but when you're looking at reusing buildings, you want to make sure you have different kinds of buildings. And I think that's the other piece. And then, of course, I guess the last piece is the American dream. There's two things, I think, right? One is that your kids will do better than you, and the other one is that you own a house. So from the Vermont perspective, especially from the Manchester perspective, home ownership is really, really high. But at the same time, there's plenty of millennials here, right? None of them want to own a house, and they certainly don't want to own a big house. And I know that we talk about millennials as if there's like a prototypical millennial, but I think that you're going to see more and more people that want to rent. And with home ownership so high, the opposite side means that rental units are very, very low. And it also means that you can't get new workers to come into your community that, if you're talking about a newer worker who's in their mid-20s, they're going to want to move to town and rent, most likely, and then maybe if they like the community, they'll eventually move into home ownership. But if you don't have that initial rental opportunity, that I think that we're seeing, then you run into some trouble.
This is a question about funding sources. 3,000 people driving both ways from far away is an extraordinary pollution impact. Mm-hmm. Is there funding tied to our climate goals, or Manchester's climate goals, that could be part of the funding structure for local housing?
There should be. I think the global war, the committee that's meeting on talking about climate solutions, is discussing different, the plan that's going to be coming out. And I'm hopeful that we see land use as a way to combat climate change, as opposed smart land use and having people live closer to where they work as one strategy, and maybe not simply just subsidizing electric vehicles, for example. You're not solving that problem of people driving as far if you're just making it that easy. That's just my perspective, but I think there hasn't yet been money exactly tied. There's sometimes energy efficiency money from Efficiency Vermont, others that go into the building of housing to sort of subsidize extra measures to make them more energy efficient. But I don't think those dollars are quite adding up to what it really costs to cover those measures to build net zero housing, for example. It's not even close. I was just going to say that I think and maybe this is, I'll pass through Leslie. It sounds like you've got a great piece of property with tons of opportunity in a place that's pretty desirable, and that when White and Burke talks about it not penciling out, I know what they're talking about. They're talking about the cost to build the property is not going to be equal to its appraised value the day it's built. It's going to be a delta there. And so it's also not going to cash flow enough to cover the debt, right? So when you talk about building housing and affordable housing, you mitigate those things because much affordable housing is built with no debt. That's the trick. That's the secret, right? Because you're guaranteeing lower rents. You can't offer lower rents if you've got debt. And so you use low-income housing tax credits, VHCB, CDBG, all these other sources to essentially build a property that's debt-free. You have to borrow for construction loans and so forth. And so that's part of your solution here. And that what the city can do in advance of all that is cover that risk, right? Dom talked about the hardest part to get a project going is getting something started to be built out of the ground. Once that's ready, the people that build the housing can figure it out. All that pre-development work is risk, and that's part of that 25% of the cost of building housing that's related to permits and regulatory and planning and engineering. You, as a municipality, can continue to pursue planning funds to do some of that pre-development work for that site. The planning, the engineering, drawings, get things ahead of what the city's vision is. Since you own the property, the town, What's your vision for what that looks like? And get some of that work done and paid for with public sources, and then that's available to whoever is going to be your development partner, whether that's shires or it's a private entity, and you can get ahead and start reducing that risk and that overall cost delta by having some of those things paid for. And it behooves you to do that work in the next year or so, because there are more capital dollars to build housing in the next few years than there will be, I've ever seen in my lifetime in this industry. And it takes a long time to line up and get in line to receive these competitive dollars. And the next few years, that line will be shorter every single time compared to what it normally is. So, I mean, that was my perspective.
I was going to also offer the affordable housing tax credits and other financing pots that Josh runs at DHCD and that Jenny has at the HCB, and encourage you to pursue those with a local developer partner. And but it sounds like you're moving in the right direction. You've already got a feasibility or a consultant, some money for consultancy. At the same time, I wanted to go back a little bit. It sounded like you had a 60-acre property that you have some opportunities with, and wanted to encourage you to consider your direct municipal ARPA funds for, you talked about the need for infrastructure there, and my understanding is that is a potential use of those funds.
It is,
So I think that's a great opportunity, a nice bigger space with you're going to get some economies of scale there on housing, and so that would be ideal.
We are using, right now we're using the ARPA funds for the Main Street design, and we're also using it for this one. So we have two design projects that are in the mix. Main Street is one that kind of got pushed ahead a little bit because there was more developable land, and then this one is right behind it. And this one, we have done some real preliminary work, and this one is really doable. I do want to sort of say out there that because of its April 2023, there is a certain level of, I don't want to use the word urgency, but a certain level of priority that the town wants to be ready when the land reverts back to us. The town wants to be ready to jump and do something with this. We don't want to lay vacant for a year or two or anything like that. The other thing that I thought was interesting, where's the gentleman with the net zero, the carbon question? We've talked to shires before in the past, and I think they've done a really good job of marketing the property in Manchester. We have 2 rental properties in Manchester and then some other ones. But what I think is really interesting is the number of people that are spending almost as much money on rent in New York State. Take a town like Granville, driving to Manchester every day, so you add up that cost. And I think those are the hidden costs. You never really think about, what's it, if you go with the IRS rate, it's 56, what is it these days, 56 cents or something like that a mile. And really where I think the target there is especially families with kids. And I think the same thing in Arlington too, because the Arlington school system and the Manchester school system are excellent school systems. And so I think the real attraction point there is not only are you saving money, you're saving an hour a day, which really adds up. You're saving gasoline, and you're sending your kid to one of the best schools in the Northeast, really. So I think that's really kind of a target, and it's always been for both Arlington and Manchester. One of the big selling points is the school system.
John, in the interest of keeping with the smart growth concept, are we considering all the support services that are needed as we hopefully attract more families, depending on the demographic, healthcare, childcare, elder care?
It's something that we've always struggled with in Manchester. We've struggled with it recently as well. I think there's a couple things. One is childcare. So we have North Shore Day School. I think it's they're licensed for 96 kids, I think, which is a lot. And our healthcare system, we've made advances in the healthcare system, both at the North Shore Medical Campus and the new downtown urgent care system, which I think has relieved some pressure. as far as like after-school care, for example, daycare, and also senior programs, I actually kind of go back to the new building, which I definitely encourage people to take a look at. We've specifically designed it, so we call it a field house, and I've always kind of downplayed it because it sounds a little jockey. It is really a community center, and so we've talked about teen centers in town, we've talked about senior centers, we've talked about community centers. And the interesting thing is, I think that building a teen center, so a teen center means that during the day when school's in session, it's empty, or at least it should be, unless, or they should send a truant officer down there probably. And then a senior center, you know, this particular facility will be open until 8 or 9 o'clock at night. The senior center probably is not going to be as active at 9 o'clock at night as it would be at noontime. I mean, it's just a fact of life. I find myself now, I think 8 o'clock is late these days, and I'm not even 50 yet. So I think that's a big piece of the puzzle, is this new facility. But I think there's also more to do. You know, for example, everybody knows that there's huge challenges with anybody who wants to get mental health services in the area. There's a massive critical shortage of that. And of course the child care system as well. And you know, we have to keep working on it, but that's all I can say.
I'm Don Keelan. Thank you all for being here. I live here in Arlington, and I'm at the twilight of my career as a 50 years in real estate development, and having done a few projects in Manchester, Ormsby Hill, Partridge Hill, a few, and the company run by my son is still there now, a number of projects. But just a couple things. It was 1991, John, when you acquired the airport site from Francesco Galisi.
That's right, yep.
Hotel. Another thing is, if you want to see how many people are coming in from out of state to work in Manchester here in Arlington, just stay here at the corner of 313 and 7 every morning from 6:30 to 8:30. It's tremendous. The Orbis company down the street, last year when they told the Arlington Renewal Project, they had 8 employees who live in Arlington out of their 250. And Mac had 68 out of 540. So we have a crisis. What's very encouraging to me, having done Ormsby Hill 30 years ago, is to see a sea change in the attitude of Manchester in wanting to get development done. And what was very encouraging today was to hear of what's going on in St. Albans. And those of you who are in the trying to get housing, and if I hear the commissioner right this morning, it's a crisis, then if it is a crisis, let's deal with it as a crisis. And what you're hearing about St. Albans is, how do we make things work? That's a very fundamental thing in development. How do we make things work? Too many planning boards, zoning boards, Act 250 the districts always would say, you can't do it. But how can we do it? And what was discouraging in a way today was to hear about the Inn at Willow Pond. There's 44 units that could be built there. How do we find a way to make that water system work? How do we find a way to make the sewer system work if we're going to create 41 units? It was very discouraging last month to read of the, I think it was the Slattery Company, who pulled out of Rutland, where they had proposed 260 housing units in the old John Deere site, because they ran into a wetlands issue. Okay, fine. You know, you may not be able to build in wetlands. I agree with that. But did the town of Rutland go to them, find and let them know, if you can't build there, here's another place you can do it. So what I'm saying, the way to the future, and all of you are very encouraging to me today, is to see so many young people here. It's going to be the next generation to resolve this problem. How do we make it work? The fact that the Willow Pond has a sewer system problem or a water problem, that's not the end of the world. As a developer, we were in, over the years, we've accomplished a lot of things a lot more difficult than that. But it's the attitude. And I love the attitude of St. Albans, and that's got to be contagious. And if that can spread around Vermont, then this housing crisis, which is severe, right, we can really get our hands around it. Thank you very much.
So Dawn actually,
I just wanted to make one last comment. First, I just wanted to say how encouraging it is to hear you talking about your use of local ARPA funds on these projects, and the way that the state funders will look at that is that will increase the competitiveness of your application significantly, so that's great. And I also, like Josh, want to encourage you to come to us as soon as tomorrow to talk about feasibility funding and project capacity funding to help you work out these exact kinds of issues. As you say, that 18 months between now and your lease ending will go by really quickly, and so would like to talk to you about that.
That's great, absolutely.
that was great. That's why we're doing this one.
With the ARPA money, it is interesting. I do read these news articles from other communities, not around here, but across the state, where it isn't, it's not just a bucket of money that you can spend on anything, so you got to be careful. So when you're talking to your select boards, you just have to be under the understanding that it isn't on anything you want. There are certain things, and there's certain things that are an absolute yes, and then there's many that are absolutely no way, and then there's this bucket in the middle, which is, it depends. It depends how you write it up, it depends, like on housing, whether it has an affordable housing component to it. So I think that anyone that's here, there's a really, really good chance that your community has this ARPA money. And one of the requirements is that actually your town needs to ask you how you want to spend it. In the end of the day, it is the select board's call in this particular piece of money, unlike town meeting, but one of the requirements is they have to engage you. And then I think that part of the process is having an educated dialogue back and forth between the voters and the taxpayers and the board that's going to make the decision, to know that it's not, you can't use it to put a Ferris wheel in the town green, unless it's only going to be a certain group or something. I definitely drop the Ferris wheel idea. It's a terrible idea.
Yeah, the biggest cities and towns is a great resource for figuring out what
absolutely.
So why don't you three stay? Thank you. Thanks. That was very informative. Why don't you three